Okay, let's take a look at project details. So we've got all these projects and we want to know what more we can find out about them. We see the summary information, what we think the cost is, baseline cost, proposed budget to begin with, how much did we allocate when we first started this thing, what the variance is between our proposed budget versus the current estimated cost on the planned work, start, finish, all that kind of stuff, but we want to know more. So we're going to dive into the project. By clicking on the project name, we're taken down into the project details. In project details, you can land on this page, for instance, which shows us the current status of the project in terms of where it is in its life cycle. Projects often have life cycle methodologies that the organization is using to keep track of how far along the project is. Is it in early analysis and scoping? Is it in planning? Is it in the execution phase where we're doing all the work? Is it ready to be deployed out in the world, whatever the outcomes are for the project? And has it been closed out? Has it been archived? Has it gone through a post-project review? All of these things are typical things that you might find in a project lifecycle. So if we click on the name of the project, that will be most typically what we see if we're working with a project that has a complex life cycle. If we're working with a project that has no life cycle, no specific stages that we're keeping track of or anything like that, we won't see this page. If we do see this page, we will also see what is happening in the current stage. So we're in the current stage of 2.0 planning, and we're in the substage 2.1 planning. Right now, the things that are expected are to refine the requirement, to re-estimate and develop the work plan, and to baseline the plan. And we can see down below some further information about what might need to be completed versus what has been completed. So project details and project information is complete. Schedule, there's nothing required to be filled in. The status, there's nothing required. And the strategic impact, there's nothing required to be filled in. We can also expand the workflow stages to see what else this life cycle looks like. So we can see that in the scoping stage, there was a capture substage, there was a scope approval substage. Within the planning, there's just the 2.1 planning that we're in right now. Within executing, there's the execution stage and the execution complete substage. And if you go down to readiness, there's a close stage, and we can create as many others as are appropriate for how we manage our projects. If we continue down the list then, we have these things called project detail pages. Each project detail page provides a certain amount of information about it. Oftentimes, you'll have a page that provides the business case for the project or the project charter. Oftentimes, you'll have some high-level summary information. Oftentimes, you'll have a page that's just dedicated to collecting status each week. And you'll typically, if you're doing a structured portfolio selection process, also have a place where you identify how this project aligns against the strategic objectives of the organization. And finally, and probably most importantly, you'll also have a detail page that concentrates on the schedule. The schedule is going to be the place where we have most alignment with what people are seeing on the desktop application, Paul Desktop or Project Online Desktop or Project Professional. So in the schedule page, we'll see the detailed information about this schedule in as much as the project manager has broken down the effort. So we may see a very complex list of tasks. We may see a very simple list of tasks. Typically, simple or complex is a reflection of how many people are involved, how many locations does this affect, how many teams does this affect, how many business units does this affect. A lot of different characteristics will cause something to be or not be complex. This particular example is a relatively simple example, 21 tasks, not really something that's expected to take very long. In this case, it's expected to take a total of 70 days, so 2.5 months, give or take. But that's not really considered very long for a project. Obviously, some projects are even faster than this. You could have a project that takes place across 1 week or even a couple days. You'd have something that just takes a month. You'd have something that takes multiple years. Just depends on the nature of what you are keeping track of and what you're scheduling. As you see across here, the details can be very specific. We can have a whole set of calculated indicators. We can have rolled up information. We can have predecessor and successor relationships where tasks are connected to each other. We can identify who is responsible for the different tasks. All that's possible in our schedule view. The other thing you should have noticed is that our ribbon changed drastically. So our project ribbon no longer is projects, it's just this one project. And so the ribbon is reflective of that. We can edit the project, close the project. We can provide current status to the project, change options about it, go to the project site that I've mentioned a couple times. We can build a team like we could from the top level. We can go directly to the documents, issues, deliverables, the risks. We can also, just like at the top level, we can set project permissions. Here we can also set project permissions. And last but not least, it has a previous next couple buttons here. That is in reference to which project detail page we're currently on. So we click next, it's going to move down the list. We click previous, it's going to move up the list. If we continue over to the right, we see page. Page is very seldom used by the project manager. Page really reflects what kind of things we're going to show on this page. And normally in Project Online, we don't really want end users changing the page. The reason is because this page is a universal page. It's used by every single project. If one particular project manager has enough authority and can change this page, it will affect how other people see their project. So we don't want people doing that, generally speaking. And normally they won't have the rights to do that. So that kind of takes care of this whole ribbon. Everything on here is mostly related to the page and what is the content on. We then see task. Task goes into a lot of detail as to what we can do. We can edit the project. We can then start making adjustments to the task that we see. We could create more tasks. We could status the tasks as 0 to 100%. We could indent some things so that they're subordinated to other summary tasks or higher level tasks. We can create connections between tasks. We can link them together. That's what creates this idea of a predecessor and successor relationship between the tasks. We can also set a baseline. In project management, the point of setting a baseline is so that we look at our initial plan, set a baseline of that plan, so we establish a copy of that information, so that then later, as we're actively executing the project, we can compare what our assumptions were at the beginning versus how things have changed over time. No project is fixed. All projects change over time. They flex in and out according to the things that are happening when people are getting work done. But the baseline allows us to get a pretty good grip on whether or not we were better at estimating certain things, worse at estimating other things. So it's very common for organizations to institute baselining so that they can improve their estimating process. We then have the idea of manually scheduling things versus automation of the schedule. Automated scheduling allows the task to move in and out according to what's happening in preceding tasks. Manual scheduling acts a little bit more like a spreadsheet. Whatever you put is whatever you put. So not really, it doesn't serve quite the same purpose. And most of the time, we don't really want people actually using manual scheduling, largely because manual scheduling is going to take away our ability to see those changes to the baseline. It's going to take away our ability to see how the project evolves over time. So although it's possible, it's used mostly by individuals who are managing their own projects without working inside of a greater organization. Then we have insert and delete. So obviously we can insert and delete tasks. We can add things to the timeline above, just like we could in the top level project portfolio. And we can add things to something called roadmap. We won't go into details about that right now, but there is a higher level concept outside of Project Online called roadmap, and it allows us to, have just a timeline with multiple projects or multiple big picture ideas in it, so that leadership and others can look at the big picture without having to go off into reports or other things like that. And last but not least, we have the data element. Again, the data element constrains what we can do and see on this page. So it allows us to select from a variety of different views. We can look at things from the standpoint of just tasks, from the standpoint of tasks that have been assigned to people, from the standpoint of the resources that have been assigned to our project. All those kinds of things are available as views. Similarly to before, we have filters, we have groupings, and we can collapse and expand the different levels of information. Last but not least, just like we had before, we have the idea of zooming in and zooming out of the timeline. So we can go to days and weeks, or we can expand upwards to quarters and years, etc. And you can also scroll to a particular task so that you can find it on the schedule if it's not currently visible, like test code, not currently visible. So scroll to task, the whole Gantt chart moves, you see the scroll bar moves, and we're able to see that specific task and get more information about it. Okay, so this is a good place for us to pause as far as the information that you're seeing. I want to just wrap it up a little bit by showing you in very quick fashion the different project detail pages besides the schedule page. These detail pages are about forms and data. This applies to the project information page, project detail page. These two pages tend to be out of the box. The status page is something that we typically set up for individual customers and will have its own unique purpose. The strategic impact page is out of the box. It's designed to support the portfolio management activity and portfolio selection activity. And last but not least, you'll see again the project site. And we'll go into the project site and other details in a different session.